In this video, we're going to be looking at the forehand unit turn. We're going to be talking about what's important, what's not important, how you should practice it, and then at the end, I'm going to talk about some of the limiting factors and things that might prevent you from having an optimal unit turn. I hope you find the video helpful. If you do, be awesome if you give me that thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel before, really appreciate it if you could do that as well. So for the unit turn, we're referring to the turning of the upper body and the pelvis together. So turning as a unit. And you can see that as I do that, my racket goes with it to kind of start the preparation and take back. But the key to understanding a good unit turn is understanding forehand biomechanics, because the biomechanics are always going to be the same. And this is whether you use a modern style or a more classical style. We're going to be driving through our back or outside hip to initiate the swing. We're then going to be using the torso, and then that's followed by the arm and the racket. So it's always that sequential motion. That's the kinetic chain. Hip, torso, arm and racket coming through. So we need to make sure that we're setting that up with our unit turn. So if I'm hitting a forehand from an open stance, I'm loading off my right leg as a right-handed player. You can see that I'm rotating into this leg. So my belly button is twisting this way towards my hip. My torso is rotated so it's almost to the side. And then they're the kind of key pieces, because now I can drive through my hip, then my torso comes through, and then the racket starts to come through afterwards. It would be exactly the same if I was hitting a neutral stance. I'm still twisting in to this back hip, so then I can drive through the back hip, follow that by the torso, and then the racket coming through. And again, that's going to be the same for both the modern style and the classical style. It just looks a little bit different. So for a modern forehand, my unit turn is going to be somewhere up there. For a classical forehand, maybe I'm just taking it back and I'm into this position, but I still need to get my pelvis rotated so I can drive through my hip. I still need to get my torso rotated so that I can use my torso to follow up from the pelvis and initiate the forwards movement of the shoulder. So they're the key pieces to understand. And that's why we have to do our unit turn in a very specific way. So what I want to do now is kind of show you how to practice it to overcome some of the common hurdles that players struggle with. Okay, now you understand the unit turn, let's talk about how to practice it. And we're basically going to be doing shadow swings, but doing it in two parts. We're going to do a static version and then a version when we're moving, because you want to understand the feeling of the rotation of the upper body and the pelvis. And you also need to start to work on how you transition into that as you're moving towards the ball. So we're going to start with the static variation, and we're going to do two versions for this. For version one, the right foot is going to be still, and I'm just going to be practicing my unit turn. So you'll see that my left leg pivots, but the reason we're keeping the right leg still is because I want you to get the feeling for rotating and loading into this hip. So as I do that, my left pelvic bone comes over across this way, my belly button is twisting in towards this pelvis, and my belly button is going to end up pointing more towards the side fence. And obviously you'll see that as I do that, my upper body is going as a whole unit. So you just want to get the feeling for doing this. Get the loading into the hip. For variation, or for version 2 of the static variation, we're now going to be doing a pivot step. So we're going to be stepping out onto our right leg. As we step onto our right leg, we're going to be loading into that hip, again, twisting their left pelvis to the side, twisting the belly button to the side, and the upper body goes with it. And that's going to be the key, that you load into that hip. So you just want to get the feeling for doing this over and over again. And here's where I need to point out the first kind of thing that doesn't matter, because what does matter is the loading of the hip and the upper body unit turn. What doesn't matter is the precise position of your racket or when you let go of the racket, because a lot of coaches overcoach that stuff. They talk about, the racket needs to be head height, or we need to let go at around 90 degrees or some specific angle. Honestly, that stuff doesn't matter. You can hit an absolutely high quality forehand by going from this position, just turning, letting go of it straight away, taking your racket back to there, and just hitting through the ball with good timing. So it doesn't matter exactly what your racket position is or when you let go of the racket. All that stuff is style versus substance. The key piece is getting the feeling for loading into your right hip. Now that you've got the feeling for rotating in the hip, we're going to work on a few different footwork patterns and movements towards the ball. So the first variation that we've got is going to be just a step out, very similar to what we've just done, but we're adding in the split step. And we'll be using this when the ball is hit kind of deep and fairly close to you, and probably going to be hitting from an open stance. So I just step out, and as I do that, I'm doing exactly what we've just done, rotating my upper body, rotating my pelvis, and loading into this right leg. So that's variation 1, and you just have to do enough repetitions of this until it becomes a habit. For variation 2, we'll be using this when the ball is a little bit further away, but generally still hit fairly hard, fairly deep. But we're now going to be adding in a shuffle. So I land from the split step, shuffle, and at the end of the shuffle, I'm rotating and loading into this hip. In terms of the shuffle, I'm going to be pushing off my left leg, landing on my right heel a little bit, not quite as exaggerated as that, but landing on my right heel and shuffling. But again, the key piece is that as I finish the movement, I'm loading into this hip. And again, it's just a case of going through enough repetitions so that it becomes automated. The third variation we're going to work on is a crossover step. We do this when the ball is further away and we've got to cover more ground. So it looks a little bit like this. You'll notice the first step's a little bit different because I'm dropping my foot underneath my hip. So I'm landing nice and wide from my split step. I'm now bringing my foot underneath so that I can push off and cover more ground. But again, the key piece is rotating and loading into this outside hip. And once again, it's just a case of doing enough repetitions so that this is an automatic process. And between those 3 footwork patterns, if the ball is hit deep to you, depending how far it is away, you'll just be able to set up in an optimal position and then use full biomechanics. Now, there are additional ones that you might need to work on, and to help you with that, I've created a free footwork program. If you'd like the free program, it'll be placed up in the corner there, and there'll be a link down in the description so that you can grab hold of that free program. It's going to show you these drills in a little bit more detail, break down the split step, the different types of pivot step, and then some of the other transitions to move to shorter balls and deeper balls. So the link is up there and down there if you're interested, because what we need to do now is talk about the biggest thing that's potentially going to limit you and prevent you from using a good quality unit turn. The hard thing, and often the very frustrating thing about tennis, is that sometimes practicing on things and working on them over and over again isn't enough to fully solve the problem, because one of the biggest challenges in tennis is actually the visual side of things. So you definitely need to work on your footwork and program them in, but if you're the sort of player that can't quickly and accurately read where the ball's going, so maybe the ball's crossing over the net or it's bouncing on your side of the court before you start your preparation, that is going to prevent you from loading in the right way, from doing a good quality unit turn, and that's basically going to ruin the rest of your stroke. Now, that happens because your visual system isn't capable of kind of working at a sufficiently high level, because we've got lots of different visual skills that are important in tennis. The good news though is that you can actually train and improve your vision using very simple training drills. If you'd like to learn more about it, I've created a full web class that's going to go into a lot more detail. I'll place a link up there and I'll place a link down in the description so that you can check that one out. If you're not interested, no problem, but do get that footwork program, work on it until these things become habit, and it's going to be very, very helpful in terms of improving your unit turn and preparation. Okay, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give me that thumbs up. Any questions or comments, leave them down below.